Some stories are hard to forget, not because they are well written, not because they are dramatic, but because they are true. The events you are about to hear were reported to police, documented in court records, confirmed by witnesses, or survived by the very people telling them. No embellishment, no creative license, just what happened. Welcome back to The Scary Collector. Tonight we have 6 stories, 6 real accounts of terror, violence, and the kind of darkness that ordinary people stumbled into and barely walked away from. Make yourself comfortable. Turn off unnecessary lights if you want the full effect. And remember, every single one of these really happened. Story 1. The Man in the Attic. Tracy Morris was a 34-year-old nurse who lived alone in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. She had bought the house 2 years earlier after her divorce, and she had spent those 2 years turning it into something that felt like hers. New paint on the walls, a garden out back, wind chimes on the porch. She was not the kind of person who scared easily. She worked night shifts in a busy emergency room. She had seen things, real things, that most people only see in movies. Death, trauma, the rawest edge of human suffering. So when she started noticing small things out of place around the house, she did not panic. She did not call anyone. She made rational explanations. Started with food. She kept a detailed grocery list on the refrigerator, and she was the kind of person who tracked what she had. One morning, she noticed a loaf of bread was missing 4 slices. She had only used 2. She told herself she must have miscounted. Then a blanket disappeared from the hallway closet. She assumed she had moved it herself and forgotten. Then one evening she came home from a 12-hour shift and found a glass on the kitchen counter, washed and upside down in the drying rack. She had not used a glass that morning. She had not been home since the previous night. She stood in her kitchen for a long time staring at that glass. She told herself she was tired, exhausted even. She told herself nurses did not sleep enough and that she was starting to imagine things. She bought a small notebook and started keeping a log. Over the following 3 weeks, the log filled up. A bar of soap moved from one side of the bathroom to the other. A window in the spare bedroom that she always kept locked was found unlocked. A single dirty footprint appeared on the bathroom tile. Larger than her own, narrower than a woman's foot. She told herself there was an explanation. A friend who had a spare key. Her imagination. Stress. But she changed the locks anyway. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in November. She had come home from a day shift, which was unusual for her. She was restless. She heated up leftovers, watched television for an hour, and went to bed early. She woke up at 3 in the morning to a sound. It was soft, barely there, a kind of slow, rhythmic creak from somewhere above her. Tracy lived in a single-story house. There was no room above her bedroom. There was only the attic. She lay still in the darkness listening. The creaking continued, slow, patient, like someone shifting their weight, trying not to be heard but unable to stay completely still. She reached silently for her phone. Her hands were shaking, but she dialed 911 and kept the line open, placing the phone face down on her nightstand. Then she took the kitchen knife she had started keeping under her bed, because somewhere in her gut she had known. She had known for weeks that something was wrong. And she slipped out of bed. She did not go to the attic. She went out her back door in bare feet and stood in her garden in the November cold and waited. The police arrived in 11 minutes. They entered through the front. They searched the house. They found nothing on the ground floor. Then one officer pulled down the attic hatch in the hallway. The beam of his flashlight found a nest. That is the word the police report used. A nest. A makeshift bed assembled from Tracy's own blankets, her spare pillows, and clothes taken from her laundry. empty food wrappers, a water bottle, a bucket that had been used as a toilet, and a man. He was 31 years old. He had no previous address. He had been living in Tracy Morris's attic for an estimated 6 to 8 weeks. He had watched her every day. Through a small gap in the attic boards, he could see directly into her bedroom. When asked how he got in, he said the kitchen window. When asked why, he did not answer. When asked what his intentions were, he said only, "I wasn't ready yet." Tracy Morris sold the house 6 weeks later. She moved to a different state and changed her name legally. At the sentencing hearing, she read a statement. She said she now understood what it meant to be prey, that she had been watched in the most private moments of her life by someone she did not know existed, that she could not sleep in a house without first checking every room, every closet, every crawl space. She said, "I had a home. Now I have a place I try to sleep in. Those are not the same thing." The man received 4 years in prison for criminal trespass and stalking. He was released in 2009. His current whereabouts are unknown. Story 2. The Smiling Man. This story was first shared anonymously on an online forum back in 2012. The person who wrote it used the username Night Shiftwalker. He described an encounter that he claimed had permanently altered the way he moved through the world at night. It was later picked up by multiple news agencies and even paranormal researchers who tried to dig deeper. What made this account truly unusual was that 3 other completely unrelated people in the same city came forward within just a few weeks, each one claiming they had seen the exact same figure. Different times, in different locations across Portland. None of them had read each other's stories beforehand. None of them knew each other personally. And yet all 3 descriptions matched almost perfectly down to the smallest unsettling details. I want to start by saying I am not a person who believes in the supernatural. I am not someone who gets scared easily at all. I am a big guy, physically strong and used to handling myself. I've walked home alone at 2 in the morning for many years in this city, and nothing has ever made me feel truly unsafe. Until this particular night. It was about 1:30 in the morning. The air was cool and still. I was walking home through a quiet residential neighborhood. Most of the streetlights were working properly that night. There was no one else out on the sidewalks. Just the steady sound of my own footsteps echoing slightly and the distant hum of traffic a few blocks over. I was maybe halfway home when I first noticed someone on the other side of the street. My first immediate thought was, that person is walking really weird. Something about their movement just looked completely off. They were tall, very tall, much taller than an average person, wearing a long dark coat that came all the way down to their knees. And they were walking, but not in any normal human way. Their arms were hanging completely straight and rigid at their sides, not swinging naturally at all. And their steps had this strange jerky up and down motion, like every single step was a conscious effort, as if they were learning how to walk for the very first time by concentrating extremely hard on each individual movement. I slowed my pace down without even thinking about it. I kept watching them carefully from across the street. They were moving roughly in the same direction as me. Then suddenly, without breaking their strange stride, without turning their head even slightly, they just stopped dead in their tracks. They stood perfectly still on the sidewalk across from me, completely motionless now. I stopped walking too, almost instinctively. We were maybe 40 feet apart. The streetlight was positioned right behind them, so I couldn't see their face clearly at first. Just a tall, dark shape, height and complete unnatural stillness. And then they turned to face me. It was slow, very slow, like a security camera deliberately panning over to lock onto a target. And they were smiling. I know that might sound like nothing special at first. People smile all the time. But this was not a normal smile in any sense. I don't know how else to describe it. The smile was far too wide. It stretched across the entire lower half of their face in a way that real human smiles simply don't. It looked like something that had studied what a smile was supposed to look like, but had not quite gotten the mechanics right. And the eyes? Those eyes were open far too wide. Not wide with surprise or shock. Just open, fully open, unblinking, staring directly across at me with an intensity that felt completely wrong. I started walking again, faster this time, not quite running yet, but some deeper part of my brain was already screaming a warning. Do not run. Whatever you do, do not run. I looked back over my shoulder just once. It was following me, still on the other side of the street, still wearing that same grotesque wide smile, moving in that same unnatural jerky way, keeping exact pace with me no matter how fast I went. I turned a corner sharply, hoping to lose it. I looked back. I turned the corner too, without any hesitation. I turned another corner, going completely out of my way now, heading in a totally different direction from my actual house. I did not want this thing to know where I lived. Followed, matching every move. I ran. I ran as hard as I possibly could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back again until I reached the bright lights of a convenience store. I pushed through the door, stood there in the harsh fluorescent lighting with my hands on my knees, breathing hard and trying to calm down. The woman behind the counter looked at me with concern and asked what was wrong. I could only manage to say, I don't know. I bought a bottle of water that I didn't even need. I waited inside for about 20 minutes, trying to steady my nerves. Then I called a cab to take me the rest of the way home. The cab driver, without me saying a single word about what happened, suddenly asked, You see something out there tonight? And I said yes, and he just nodded slowly, almost knowingly, and said, This neighborhood has something strange about it. I've heard other people mention the exact same thing before. Over the following month, 2 additional independent accounts surfaced from the same general area of Portland. A woman who had been walking her dog late one night at around 11 o'clock described seeing a very tall figure standing at a distance, watching her silently, smiling with an expression that she could only describe as completely inhuman in a way she couldn't fully explain, before it simply turned and walked away into a dark alley and disappeared from sight. A teenage boy gave an almost identical description of the encounter. The same tall figure, the same jerky, unnatural walk, the too wide smile, the eyes that never seemed to blink. He said it had followed him for 2 full blocks before he managed to duck safely inside his apartment building. No one ever managed to identify exactly who or what this figure truly was. The police received no formal complaints because technically no crime had been committed, at least not that anyone could prove, and the sightings simply stopped, as suddenly and inexplicably as they had first begun. But those 3 people, they still don't walk home alone at night anymore. Some things you simply cannot unsee, no matter how hard you try. Story 3. Room 1046. Not all horror stories happen in the dead of night or in isolated places. Some of them unfold in ordinary hotel rooms, in broad daylight, with hotel staff members walking the halls, bells ringing at the front desk, and other guests moving up and down the corridors just outside the door. Some of these stories remain completely unsolved even 80 years later, leaving behind more questions than answers. On January 2, 1935, a man checked into the hotel president in Kansas City, Missouri. He registered under the name Roland T. Owen. He was carrying only one small bag. He paid for the room entirely in cash, and he specifically requested room 1046 up on the 10th floor. From the very moment he arrived, the hotel staff noticed that something seemed deeply off about this guest. He immediately asked that the blinds in his room be kept completely down at all times. He insisted that he did not want any lights turned on. Multiple times during his short stay, housekeepers would knock on the door and find him sitting completely alone in the near total darkness, just sitting perfectly still in the chair by the window, not moving, not reading, not doing anything at all. He ordered almost no food from room service. He barely spoke to anyone voluntarily. On January 3rd, one of the housekeepers came to make up the room. The man was once again sitting there in the dark. She politely offered to turn on the light for him, but he refused. She asked if he was expecting any visitors. He replied only that a friend would be coming by later. A few hours after that, the same housekeeper passed by room 1046 again. This time she heard two distinct voices coming from inside, a man's voice and a woman's voice, and from her description, they did not sound like they were having a friendly or casual conversation at all. The tones were tense, argumentative. On January 4th, a bellhop noticed that the door to room 1046 was slightly ajar. He knocked politely. There was no answer. He pushed the door open a little wider and called out inside the room. The room appeared empty at first glance, but something was clearly very wrong. There was blood on the floor near the bed, smeared across the carpet as if someone had been dragged or moved. There were obvious signs of a violent struggle. Furniture pushed out of place, a lamp knocked over and broken. He immediately called for the manager. Together they searched further. They found Roland T. Owen tied securely to a chair. He was unconscious but still barely alive. He had been badly beaten, burned with cigarettes in multiple places all across his body. The telephone cord from the room had been used to tightly bind his wrists. He was rushed to the hospital right away. He regained consciousness only briefly on the second day. Even in his weakened state, he refused to tell the police who had done this to him. He refused to explain what had happened in that room. He refused to even reveal his real identity. When the police continued to press him for answers, he said only these haunting words: "Please don't involve my family. That is all I ask." He died on January 9, 1935, from the severe injuries he had suffered. The official investigation went absolutely nowhere. Roland T. Owen turned out not to be a real name at all. The hotel registration information was completely false. The address he had provided did not even exist. Fingerprints were taken and carefully checked, but they never matched any existing records at the time. Several different people later came forward claiming they had seen suspicious activity around the room. A man who had visited room 1046, a woman's voice heard arguing loudly, someone seen leaving the floor in a clear hurry on the night of the attack. But despite all of that, no one was ever charged. No one was ever properly identified. The most disturbing part of the entire case came shortly after his death. The hotel received a large and expensive floral arrangement, addressed directly to Roland T. Owen, room 1046. The card attached to the flowers simply read, "In loving memory." Whoever had sent those flowers somehow knew he was already dead, before the death had even been publicly reported in the news. The sender was never traced, not even to this day. Many decades later, investigators decided to revisit the cold case using more modern forensic techniques. They reached the conclusion with reasonable confidence that Roland T. Owen was most likely a young man named Artemus Ogletree. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, he had gone missing in 1934, and his family had never heard from him again after that. why he was really in that hotel room, who had put him there, who had tortured him so brutally, and who had sent those flowers as some kind of final message. None of these questions were ever answered. Room 1046 still exists in the hotel to this very day. The hotel president remains open for business, and as far as anyone has ever been able to determine, the person responsible for tying a young man to a chair, burning him repeatedly, and leaving him to die alone in that dark hotel room, never faced any consequences whatsoever. Story 4. The Sleepover. This story was shared with us directly by a listener who asked to be identified only as Marie. She has kindly given permission for her account to be read here. Some identifying details have been changed at her specific request for privacy. Marie was just 13 years old during the summer of 1998. She grew up on a quiet farm outside a small rural town in Minnesota, the kind of close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. The nearest neighbor was usually half a mile away, and almost nobody bothered to lock their doors at night because nobody ever thought they really needed to. Her best friend at the time was a girl she refers to as Dara. Dara's family lived about 3 miles further down the same long rural route, on a slightly larger property that included a big old barn, a paddock for the animals, and a farmhouse that had been passed down through the family for several generations. That entire summer, Marie spent a great many nights sleeping over at Dara's house. In July, she was staying over on a typical Friday night. The two girls had stayed up late, until almost midnight, watching movies and eating popcorn together. Dara's parents had gone to bed earlier. The whole house had grown quiet and peaceful. Marie was just drifting off to sleep when she suddenly heard a sound coming from outside the bedroom window. At first she assumed it was probably just an animal. The property had horses, chickens, and other farm creatures. Strange sounds at night were pretty normal out there, but this particular sound felt different somehow. It was rhythmic, slow, and very deliberate. It sounded exactly like someone walking around the outside of the house. She quietly elbowed Dara awake. Dara listened carefully too. For a long moment both girls lay completely still in the darkness, straining to hear the slow footsteps as they continued circling the house. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, crunch, pause. The steps were unhurried, patient, almost confident. Dara whispered softly, "Maybe it's just my dad checking on something." Marie whispered back, "Why would your dad be walking around the house at midnight like this?" There was no good answer to that question. The footsteps eventually stopped right outside their bedroom window. The window was on the ground floor. It only had thin curtains covering it. The girls could clearly see the glass pane. And then a bright light suddenly appeared outside. It was a flashlight, pointed directly at the window glass. The beam moved slowly and methodically across the thin curtain, as if someone was carefully searching for something. Then the light stopped moving entirely, and just stayed there, shining steadily. Something, or someone, was standing right outside their window in the pitch-black night, shining that flashlight through the glass, simply waiting. Dara grabbed Marie's arm tightly. Both girls slid silently out of bed and down onto the floor. Marie has told me many times since that she has never moved as slowly, as carefully, or as quietly in her entire life as she did during those terrifying few moments, crawling across the bedroom floor while trying desperately not to make even the smallest sound. They finally made it out into the hallway, then into Dara's parents' room, where they shook them awake as quietly as possible. Dara's father was a large, strong man, a lifelong farmer who was not easily frightened. He listened seriously to what the girls told him. He got up, went over to the window, and saw that the flashlight beam was still shining steadily through the curtain. He made 2 quick phone calls, first to the local police, and second to his closest neighbor who lived just a quarter-mile away. The neighbor arrived in only 8 minutes, driving up in his truck with a rifle ready. The police arrived about 12 minutes after that. They searched the property thoroughly, and eventually found the intruder at the very back, near the treeline. He was a man in his mid-40s. No one in the area recognized him at all. He had absolutely no connection to the family, to the town, or to anyone living nearby. He had parked his truck on an unpaved back road about half a mile away, and had walked in through the open fields. Inside his truck, the police discovered rope, duct tape, 2 full sets of zip ties, along with a bottle of chloroform and a cloth. He had clearly been watching the house for some time. Tire tracks in the field showed that he had likely been there on at least 2 previous nights. He was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted. At the trial, prosecutors made it clear that he had specifically targeted the isolated property. The 2 young girls sleeping alone in a ground-floor bedroom had been his obvious objective. He chose not to testify in his own defense. He showed almost no emotion throughout the entire court proceedings. He is still serving his sentence to this day. Marie told me this when we spoke. I think about that night very differently now that I am a mother myself. When I was only 13, I didn't fully understand exactly what was in that truck. But now I do, and I understand how close we came. If Dara and I hadn't heard those footsteps, if we had been sleeping just a little more deeply that night, I honestly don't know if either of us would still be here today. She pauses for a long moment on the phone when she says that. Then she adds softly, I am so incredibly glad that I heard those footsteps. P.S. Story 5. The voicemail. Technology has changed the way horror reaches us. People used to tell stories about shadows outside windows, scratching at doors, voices in the dark. Now sometimes the darkness calls you. In the spring of 2009, a woman in Chicago received a voicemail. She had not recognized the incoming number. She almost did not listen to it, but she did. The voicemail was 47 seconds long. It was a man's voice, calm, almost pleasant, but what he said was not pleasant. He described her apartment, not in a way that could be found online, not from a listing or a photo. He described the inside, the color of her walls, the arrangement of her furniture, the photographs she had on the shelf above her television, the particular mug she always used for her morning coffee and where she kept it. He described her routine, what time she left for work, what route she usually took, what she normally ate for lunch. He described things she had done inside her apartment that week. Specific things, private things, things no one could have known without watching through a window or being inside the space. At the end of the message, he said her name, her full name. Then he said, I just wanted you to know that I see you. I've been seeing you for a while. Then the line went dead. She called the police immediately. They traced the number, came back to a prepaid phone purchased with cash. They searched her apartment and found it. A small wireless camera, the size of a shirt button, mounted inside the bezel of a smoke detector in her living room. It was connected to a local network. It had been there, based on dust accumulation and the hardware specifications, for approximately 3 months. 3 months. She had moved into the apartment the previous November. The camera had been installed before she arrived. Whoever had done this had access to the apartment before she did. They had installed the camera for a future tenant they did not yet know. They had been waiting for someone to move in. A second camera was found in the bedroom, a third in the bathroom. Building records showed 4 previous tenants over 3 years. all female, all living alone. Police reached out to all four. 3 of them reported that during their tenancy they had received strange phone calls, felt watched, noticed things moved. 1 had filed a police report that had not been followed up on. 1 could not be reached. She had moved overseas and her contact information was outdated. The cameras were professionally installed. They were not consumer equipment. Whoever placed them had knowledge of surveillance technology and the patience to watch multiple ants over multiple years. The apartment building landlord was investigated. He passed a polygraph and had an alibi for the relevant time frames. He was never charged. The prepaid phone was purchased at a store 12 miles from the building. Security footage from the store showed a man in a hat and sunglasses. The image was not clear enough to identify. The case remains open. The woman left Chicago and has never returned. She gave one interview to a local journalist 6 months after the incident. She said, "The worst part is not the cameras. The worst part is knowing he called me. He wanted me to know. He wanted to watch me react. He wanted to feel powerful enough to take that away from me. The feeling of being safe in my own home, and he wanted me to know exactly what he had done," she said. "And it worked. I think about it every day. I don't think I'll ever stop." Story 6. The Last Hitchhiker. Before we get into this final story, I want to say something. The previous 5 stories were about specific incidents, specific moments of terror, things that began and ended, even if they never fully resolved. This final story is different. This one went on for 11 years. Between 1973 and 1984, a stretch of Highway 20 in southern Idaho became one of the most dangerous roads in America, not because of the weather, not because of the terrain, because of a man who drove that highway, who looked for people traveling alone, who offered rides, and who, for over a decade, was never caught, even as the bodies began appearing in the desert and the mountains and dry creek beds alongside the road. The first known victim was a 19-year-old woman named Carolyn who was hitchhiking to visit a friend. Her body was found 6 miles off the highway in October 1973. She had been missing for 3 weeks. Investigators noted the location. Remote, deliberate, requiring knowledge of the backcountry terrain. Not the result of a spontaneous act. This had been planned. Over the following years, more disappearances were reported along the same corridor. Young men and women, people passing through, seasonal workers, travelers, people the war. LD was unlikely to look very hard for. The bodies that were found shared a pattern. The ones that were not found left only an absence. A missed call, an unanswered letter, a name on a list of people who had simply stopped appearing in the world. By 1979, investigators from 3 counties were quietly collaborating on what they believed was a series of related killings. But they had no suspect, no description that held together, no physical evidence that survived the elements. What they had was a road, and a pattern, and 11 victims they were certain about, and more they suspected. His name was Robert Lee Cater. He was a truck driver by trade, which meant he had a legitimate reason to travel Highway 20 regularly. He was in his late 30s. He had a wife and 2 children. He attended church. He coached a youth baseball team for 3 years. By all accounts, people who knew him described him as quiet, reliable, a bit reserved but perfectly normal. He had one prior misdemeanor, a bar fight in 1968. Nothing else. He came to the attention of investigators almost by accident. A woman, a nurse driving home from a late shift in 1982, reported that a man had stopped to help her when she had a flat tire on Highway 20. He had been pleasant. He had helped her change the tire, but something had felt wrong to her. She couldn't say what. She memorized his license plate, She didn't report it for 6 months. She kept telling herself it was nothing. He had been helpful. He had done nothing wrong. But she couldn't sleep, and eventually she made a call. Investigators ran the plate. The name came back as Robert Lee Cater. A routine background check turned up something odd. His truck had been logged in the proximity of 3 separate disappearance sites on the relevant dates. Not definitively, not conclusively, but 3 times. They started watching him. In March 1984, acting on a tip from a woman who had escaped, the first person who had gotten away from him. Investigators arrested Robert Lee Cater at his home. She had been hitchhiking. He had offered her a ride. He had driven off the main road, and in the moment when he had slowed down and reached for something in the footwell, she had opened the door of the moving truck and jumped. She had broken her wrist and her collarbone. She had lain in the scrub for an hour before a passing driver found her. She gave a description. She gave a partial plate number. It was enough. When investigators searched the property, they found a storage unit. Inside the storage unit, they found items belonging to 9 victims, personal effects, ID cards, objects that had no reason to be in the possession of a man who claimed to have had no connection to these people. Robert Lee Cater confessed to 11 killings over the course of 2 days of interrogation. He showed no distress during the confession. He spoke about what he had done the way someone might recount a series of unremarkable errands. When asked why, he said, "I don't know how to explain it to you. It's just what I did when I drove that road." He was convicted of 11 counts of first-degree murder in 1985 and sentenced to life without parole. He died in prison in 2001 of a heart attack. He never provided information on an estimated 4 additional victims whose disappearances investigators linked to him, but for whom no physical evidence was ever recovered. Those cases remain officially open. The woman who jumped from the truck, the one who survived, was 22 at the time. She testified at trial. She sat 6 feet from the man who had tried to kill her, and she did not look away from him once. After the verdict, she said, "I want the families of the people he killed to know that I thought about their people every day between when it happened to me and when I made that call. I knew something was wrong. I was scared to be wrong. I'm sorry I waited. She was not wrong. She was never wrong." And because of her, 11 cases were closed. A man who had evaded justice for over a decade was finally stopped, and no more names were added to the list. But 4 names are still missing. And along that stretch of Highway 20, somewhere out in the desert or the foothills, they are still waiting to be found. 6 stories, 6 real events that happened to real people in the real world. People who went to sleep not knowing someone was above them. People who walked home. People who checked into hotels. People who had sleepovers and flat tires and voicemails from strangers. Ordinary moments. Ordinary lives. Until they weren't. I think the reason true horror stories stay with us longer than fiction is this. They remind us that the world is not safe by default. That safety is something we build and maintain. And that sometimes, despite everything, the darkness finds a way in any way. But I also want you to take away something else. The nurse who listened, the woman who memorized a license plate, the girl who heard footsteps, the survivor who jumped from a moving truck. They were paying attention. And in each case, that attention, that refusal to explain away the feeling that something was wrong, is what made the difference. Trust that feeling. It has kept human beings alive for a long time. Thank you for spending tonight with us here at The Scary Collector. If these stories moved you, if they stayed with you, share this video with someone. Leave a comment. We read all of them. And if you have a true story, something that happened to you or someone you know, something real, send it to us. The address is in the description. We will tell it carefully. We will tell it honestly. And we will make sure it is never forgotten. Stay safe out there. and stay curious. This has been The Scary Collector.